The auction yard in the dusty border town of Tucson, Arizona, in the blistering summer of 1887, reeked of sweat, horse manure, and desperation. A crowd of rough men miners, ranchers, drifters gathered under the merciless sun, their eyes fixed on a wooden platform where human misery was sold like cattle, chained to a post, barefoot and clad in tattered rags that barely covered her emaciated frame, stood a young Apache woman named Taza. Her long black hair was matted with filth, her cheekbones sharp from starvation, and her dark eyes burned with a defiance that made the bidders uneasy. She was the last of her raiding party, captured after a brutal skirmish with the U.S. cavalry, and now she was property unwanted, filthy, starving, and slated for a fate worse than death. The auctioneer, a greasy man with a whip coiled at his hip, shouted, "Lot 47, wild Apache squaw, unbroken but useful for labor, or whatever else you got in mind." The crowd jeered, but no one raised a hand. Taza's lips curled in contempt as she spat on the ground, her spirit unbroken even as her body trembled from hunger. Hey, if this story's already gripping you in the first few seconds, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a tale like this. We're diving deep into history's forgotten corners together. The bidding started low, $5, then $10, but the offers stalled. Taza was too wild, too dangerous, the men muttered. She had bitten a soldier's ear clean off during her capture, and rumors swirled that she'd cursed her captors with Apache witchcraft. The auctioneer grew frantic, slashing the price to a measly $2, but still no takers. Taza stood taller, her chin lifted, refusing to cower. She was N.D., born of the Bedunkohe band under Geronimo's shadow, and her mother had taught her to die before submitting. But death seemed closer than freedom, as the sun baked her skin and her stomach gnawed itself hollow. Then, from the back of the crowd, a lone figure stepped forward, a tall, broad-shouldered cowboy in a weathered duster, his face half hidden by a low-brimmed hat. Jack Callahan, a drifter with a reputation for trouble and a Colt revolver that never missed, raised his hand. $3, he called, his voice low but steady. The crowd parted, whispers rippling like a breeze through mesquite. The auctioneer grinned, sensing a sale. Sold. To the cowboy with the death wish. Taza's eyes locked onto Jack's, searching for his intent buyer, abuser, or something else entirely. She didn't know it yet. But this moment would ignite a saga of blood, love, and redemption that would echo across the Arizona Badlands. Jack cut Taza's chains with a Bowie knife, ignoring the auctioneer's protests about handling the merchandise. He tossed her a canteen, and she drank greedily, water spilling down her chin as she glared at him. "Why?" she rasped in broken English, her voice hoarse from disuse. Jack didn't answer, just led her to his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Sombra. The crowd watched, expecting a fight, but Taza mounted behind him without resistance, not out of submission, but because she was calculating her escape. Jack's ranch, a modest spread 30 miles west, near the Babacuvari Mountains, was a world away from the auction block. He gave her a corner of the bunkhouse, a blanket, and a plate of beans and cornbread. "Eat," he said, his tone gruff but not cruel. Taza ate, her eyes never leaving him, waiting for the inevitable demand. But Jack turned away, leaving her alone. That night, she stole his knife and hid it under her pallet, ready to slit his throat if he touched her. But he didn't. Days turned into weeks, and Jack's behavior baffled her. He taught her to tend the horses, never raising a hand, never forcing himself. He spoke little, but when he did, it was about the land, the saguaro cactus. Coyotes howl the way the monsoon clouds gathered like warriors on the horizon. Taza began to watch him, this white man with scars on his knuckles and a sadness in his eyes that mirrored her own. Jack's past was a shadow he carried like a loaded rifle. 10 years earlier, he'd been a family man in Texas with a wife, Sarah, and a young son, Tommy. Comanche raiders had burned his homestead, killing Sarah and taking Tommy, who was never found. Jack had tracked the war party for months, only to find his son's scalp on a lance. The grief broke him, turning him into a drifter who lived by the gun, taking ranch jobs and bounty contracts. He'd bought Taza on impulse. Not for labor or lust, but because her defiance reminded him of Sarah's fire. He saw in her a chance to atone, to protect what he'd failed to save before. But Taza didn't know this, and trust was a foreign word. One night, as a storm raged outside, she confronted him with the stolen knife. "You buy me. Why no take? She demanded, her English improving with each day. Jack met her gaze unafraid. I ain't your master, Taza. You're free to go when you're strong enough. She didn't believe him, but the knife stayed unused. Slowly, she began to help around the ranch not because she owed him, but because the work gave her purpose. She repaired fences with a skill that shamed the hired hands, and her knowledge of the desert's plants saved the cattle during a drought. Jack watched her transform from a starving captive into a force of nature, her strength returning like a river after rain. The first twist came when a bounty hunter named Silas Crow rode onto the ranch, trailing dust and trouble. Crow, a wiry man with a pockmarked face and a sheriff's badge he'd bought with blood money, had been at the auction. He recognized Taza and saw dollar signs. That squaw's wanted for murder, he lied, flashing a forged wanted poster. Killed 3 soldiers in cold blood. I'm taking her back for the reward. Jack knew the poster was fake. Crow was notorious for inventing crimes to collect bounties. But the law was a slippery thing in 1887 Arizona. Taza, overhearing, grabbed a rifle and prepared to fight. I die free, she told Jack, her eyes blazing. But Jack had a plan. He invited Crow to stay for supper, spiking his whiskey with laudanum from the medicine chest. As Crow slumped unconscious, Jack and Taza tied him up and found a ledger. In his saddlebag proof, he'd been extorting ranchers and framing innocents. They left him for the territorial marshal, who was closing in on Crow's trail. The incident bound Jack and Taza closer, but it also painted a target on their backs. Word spread that Jack Callahan was harboring a dangerous Apache, and the local ranchers, led by a bigot named Harlan Pike, began to circle. Pike owned half the cattle in the territory and hated anything that wasn't white and submissive. He saw Taza as a threat to his vision of a civilized Arizona, and Jack as a traitor for protecting her. Pike's men started small cutting fences, poisoning water holes, but escalated to burning Jack's barn one moonless night. Taza, awakened by the flames, rallied the hands and saved most of the livestock, her shouts in Apache cutting through the chaos like a war cry. Jack, watching her lead men twice her size, felt something shift in his heart. But Pike wasn't done. He sent a message: surrender the squaw, or the ranch would be ashes. Jack refused, and Taza, now fully healed and fiercer than ever, insisted on fighting back. "This my home now," she said, her English fluent from months of listening to Jack. "We take war to Pike." Jack hesitated. Revenge had cost him everything once, but Taza's resolve was unbreakable. She taught him Apache guerrilla tactics, striking at dusk, using the terrain, leaving no trace. Their first raid hit Pike's supply wagons, scattering his men and reclaiming stolen cattle. The ranchers whispered of a ghost warrior and her cowboy ally, and Taza's legend began to grow. The tension peaked when Pike kidnapped Maria, a young Mexican girl who worked as Jack's cook, using her as bait to lure Taza into a trap. Pike's ranch, a fortified compound ringed with armed guards, was a death trap, but Taza wouldn't leave Maria to fate. She and Jack devised a plan, using her knowledge of the desert to infiltrate at night. Taza moved like a shadow, silencing sentries with a knife, while Jack provided cover with his rifle. They found Maria in a cellar, bruised but alive, and Taza's rage boiled over when she saw Pike's men laughing about taming the Apache. In the ensuing fight, Taza took a bullet to the shoulder but kept moving, her tomahawk finding Pike's lieutenant. Jack faced Pike himself in the ranch house, the two men trading blows amid shattering furniture. "You done, Callahan?" Pike snarled, but Jack's grief-fueled strength won out. He didn't kill Pike, just broke his jaw and tied him for the marshal. Maria was saved, and Pike's empire crumbled as his men turned on him to save their own skins. But Taza's wound was grave, and as Jack carried her back to the ranch, she slipped into a fever, whispering her mother's name. For days, Taza hovered between life and death, her body burning as Jack sat by her bedside, reading from a tattered Bible he hadn't opened in years. He told her about Sarah and Tommy, his voice breaking, and Taza, in her delirium, spoke of her own losses: her parents killed in a cavalry raid, her brother lost to the reservation. When she finally opened her eyes, weak but alive, she reached for Jack's hand. "You saved me," she whispered. "Now I save you." Their bond, forged in blood and fire, became something deeper. Jack proposed under a cottonwood tree, not with a ring but with a promise. "Be my partner, Taza, in this life and whatever comes after. She accepted, not as a submissive wife, but as an equal, and their wedding was a quiet affair, witnessed by Maria and the ranch hands, with a medicine man, Taza, trusted to bless their union in the Apache way. But the story wasn't over. Geronimo, still fighting in the mountains, sent word. Through a runner, Taza's capture had shamed the ND, and some warriors wanted her to return to the fight. Taza faced a choice: stay with Jack and the life they'd built, or rejoin her people and risk everything. The decision tore at her, but Jack refused to cage her. "Go if you must," he said, "but no, I'll be here, waiting." Taza chose to stay, not out of weakness, but because she saw a new way to fight for her people's future, not just their past. She began teaching Apache children on the ranch, smuggling them from the reservations to learn their language and stories. Jack supported her, using his contacts to protect the operation. Their ranch became a haven, a bridge between worlds, and Taza's name spread as a symbol of resistance and hope. Years later, in 1894, when Geronimo surrendered, Taza rode to Fort Sill to meet him. The old warrior, weathered but unbowed, embraced her as a daughter. "You fought your war," he said, "and you won." Taza returned to Jack, now graying but still steady, and they raised a family too. Sons and a daughter, each carrying the fire of both Apache and cowboy blood. The ranch thrived, and Taza's school grew, producing leaders who would fight for native rights in the courts and legislatures of the 20th century. Jack died in 1912, buried under the cottonwood where he'd proposed, and Taza followed in 1921, her grave beside his. Their descendants still tend the land, telling the story of the last Apache woman on the auction block who found love, power, and purpose with a cowboy who saw her soul. That's the saga of Taza and Jack, a tale of defiance, redemption, and a love that defied a divided world. From which part of the country are you watching this video? Drop your answer in the comments, and let's keep this story alive together.